So, good afternoon. I am Paritosh and I will be your host for the session. Foremost, I would like to tell you that me and the entire CCI team are very pleased to have you over here with us. Honestly, last 24 hours have truly been very amazing and exciting for me. Ever since I was informed that I was supposed to take your interview, I have done my research. And that research actually took me to very fascinating places of finance and society. And very slowly, I began uh, to understand or to alter my understanding of public expenditure as well as investments. So today we would like you to explore these ideas for us and all our viewers to understand this field much more clearly. And I would like to tell all my viewers and all our viewers that today's session will focus on Mr. Shantanu's journey, uh, academic journey, as well as personal achievements. And a majority of our discussion will be on the works of the Social Finance India and the responsibility that Mr. Shantanu has in order to cater as a CEO. And as a brief introduction to the company, Social Finance India is a not-for-profit organization working on a philanthropic field of impact investment and social return. So on that note, I welcome you all to this session. Today we have Mr. Shantanu Ghosh with us as our keynote speaker. I am Paritosh, your host, and you're watching CCI Talks. So you have had a very successful and a dynamic career. From working with corporates like Unilever to working as a CFO and a global business leader for organizations like GE and Genpact. And currently you are the CEO of Social Finance India. And you have also done some freelancing here and there. So kindly tell us about your academic as well as professional career through all these years.
Thank you, Paritosh, and hello to all the viewers. So look, I'm a middle-class Bengali, born and brought up in Calcutta. I decided to get into commerce during my high school days, but still pursued science for a while. In fact, I got into IIT, but I knew in my heart that I was not a technologist. I was more fascinated by business and commerce than by machines. And I had decided that I'm not going to do an engineering just to do an MBA later on and just shift my goals. So I started on my CA journey and spent the 3 years, including the articleship, got ranks in all my exams. And once I finished, then I was fortunate to get into what possibly is the best management training breeding ground, at least in those days, which was the Hindustan Unilever management training program. Stayed with them for about 10 years, did a bunch of different roles, and then was part of the strategy team in Hindustan Unilever, which was designing the Millennium Strategy, which was 1999. So everyone was creating their plans for 2000 a year and onwards. Once I finished that, I was keen to then pursue and get to my functional leadership goal, which was to become a CFO. And, just given the size and complexity of Unilever, that would have been many years off for me. So when I got an opportunity in GE Consumer Finance to be the CFO, I took that up for a couple of reasons. One is the desire to be a CFO, but even more because I was fascinated by GE. GE in the 1990s was an amazing story of entrepreneurship, of corporate growth, of a corporate culture, which was actually very different from Unilever in many ways, but very complementary. And I loved that culture. I liked what I read about GE, and I said that maybe I want to experience that. So that's why I shifted. So did that for about 4 years between consumer finance, and then became the CFO for GE overall in India as a country CFO, which is when I think my desire to then become a business head became very strong. So I decided that instead of continuing on the path of being a functional head, I wanted to actually run a business. I had been advising lots of business leaders how to run their business, telling them that you're not doing this right, you're not doing this perfectly, you should charge a higher price, you should be more efficient. And I thought at some stage, I should implement what I was advising as a business leader.
So you're more of a person who is into applications rather than academics.
Yeah, I was never, I had good results, but that's a little bit of I think the way Indian academic model work, where you can get to good result by putting in some effort at the right stage. But I was never scholarly. I was far more of a doing guy. So I wanted to become a business leader. So I chose Genpact because Genpact at that point in time was a captive of GE and was just going to be bought over by private equity players and made an independent company as a knowledge services, business process outsourcing consulting company for the world. So I came in to build a few businesses there. So from being a CFO of GE in India, I suddenly found myself with two other people and a team of three, trying to build businesses from scratch.
Okay, so you were again in the team. Once after being a team leader, you were again in the team.
Yeah, I was again in the team. I was just a 3-member team because it was a blank sheet of paper, right? Said go ahead and build businesses. And then one got onto planes, and for the next 14 years, I built a few businesses out there. And in the end of 2018, I was running a $1.5 billion US portfolio in terms of business globally. When I decided that, my motivation had shifted a little bit, and we can talk about that subsequently. So came out of the corporate career, freelance for about a year, between consulting for, commercial startups as well as, the development sector companies. But after a year of consulting and advising and mentoring, I again realized that I was not fully satisfied. I needed to build something and do something, and not just give gyan. So which is when this opportunity for Social Finance India came up, which is actually a startup. So I'm back to my startup days with a very small team, and trying to build something from scratch.
So like in Zist, I can see like you have enjoyed your time while building businesses rather than just running up businesses.
Yeah, I'm not a good optimizer.
Okay. So you would say like you are a good initiator at anything.
Yeah, contrary to my training of being a chartered accountant and being able to optimize, I'm actually a builder more than an optimizer.
Well, that's very different, and that's very unique of you. Well, but to be very honest, something that has struck with me is from the very beginning is that Social Finance India is a not-for-profit organization again. Like, what made you choose, opt out of your entire corporate career and become part of this NPO again? And was it always on the roadmap? Like, that you always wanted to do this? And also share like, what was the motivation that led you towards this?
So when I came out of the corporate career, I did not know what I'll do in the development sector. Okay, so it wasn't as if I came out with the job in Social Finance India. As I said, for a year, I freelanced in between. But I came out because of, two reasons. One is, over the last couple of years, I had realized that my motivation had shifted from personal growth, which is what you do in a corporate setup. Okay, you focus on your own empire. You focus on what you run. We all introduce ourselves saying I'm a business leader of X businesses or Y amount of revenue and stuff like that, and then you count your benefits based on what compensation you get and how much money you make and stocks you get and stuff like that. And it's all great. By the way, I've thoroughly enjoyed my life in corporate. When I was in corporate, I played the game as it should be played, with all the rules and with all the passion. But at some stage you realize that the game is not calling you, and that's what was happening to me. Connected with that was the fact that there was an increasing appreciation of how fortunate I've been and how privileged I've been to get the breaks and to get the kind of financial security that one had got till that time. And remember that I'm a middle-class Bengali, so my benchmark levels are not very high on that particular piece. And I wanted to give back. At certain stage, your lens moves from just what is going to happen to me to saying, what is the legacy I'm going to leave behind a little bit. So that's the reason I came out. And my philosophy in life always has been that if you play something, you play it with 100% passion and dedication. You can't be hanging around there when your mind is not there. So that's why I came out. I came out without any idea of what I'll do. And then that idea developed over a period when I met with a bunch of different people and stuff like that. Now, Social Finance India is an interesting organization because it's based on a couple of very fundamental premises, which talks about getting private capital into the development sector and focused development work.
That was very interesting to know. Like, this is a very new concept.
Yeah. And focused development work very, very sharply on outcomes. As many of us know that a lot of money that gets spent in development gets spent on inputs, actions. How many people does it cover? How much money is spent on education, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't necessarily get very sharply focused on outcome, which is how the commercial world runs.
Okay.
And the whole thesis of social finance is that if you can create large development projects, very sharply focused on outcome, you should be able to get and attract a lot of risk investment in, which can be used for innovation, which can be used for experimentation, because it's risk, right? So if the outcomes don't happen, they get paid less. If the outcomes happen or get exceeded, they get paid more. And once it becomes mainstream, then the philanthropic and government capital can continue with it over a period of time. So that's a fundamental premise. The reason I chose that over a couple of other options, which was more traditional foundations, ground level work, is because, in the development sector, I haven't been in the ground. So I don't have credibility of driving projects and initiatives on the ground. And there's a lot of learning to be done. And I'm at a stage of my life where trying to recreate that is potentially a challenge. So this is a bit of a bridge between what I was doing, which was large deal making and building large businesses, but now focused entirely on a different set of stakeholders and beneficiaries, and with a very different frame of mind and very different payoffs. But it leverages some of the skills I've built in a completely new sector. And it's useful to sometimes not change everything in life. You have to have some bridges which you can cross over.
Well, to be very honest, first thing I would say is I am deeply touched by the humbleness that you have. I'm very impressed by that. Second, over the course of time, what I saw is that you're talking about inputs versus outputs. And that puts you in this unique situation where you are one of the best candidates for this job, because you have to transform the model from the corporate world to the social world. And for that work, I think your experience would be very beneficial, would have been very beneficial for this entire time. And I've seen like you recently joined the organization in February 2020, and you'll have to, you will have a lot of challenges amidst this COVID-19 as any other CFO and CEO. First of all, best of luck for that. But I would also like to say that I was about to ask this question, but I know the answer to this already. That it does, the entire theory of social finance India does resonate with your own personality. Where I was going to answer that, do you feel like you're in the comfort zone while you're working on this? And it feels like you are already.
No, it does, because of a couple of very fundamental beliefs I have, which is that fundamentally you have to be very savvy about how you spend energy. Okay. And I think, the development sector obviously have extremely committed and extremely well-meaning people, but the energy channelizing is not as efficient and as savvy in many cases as it can be, right? And if you look at most successful organizations and successful people across the world, the fundamental difference, and obviously there are lots of other people and other organizations which have the same assets, in case of people, the same IQ, the same work habit, in case of companies, the same size of balance sheet, the same kind of other assets. But fundamentally what differentiates is how savvy you are in your expenditure of the same, right? And I think the development sector actually needs that in large amount. It's not as if, 100% of the case. There are also cases where they're doing fantastic work. And the second thing is obviously finance is easy for me to get my head around, because it's something which I've grown up with and I've worked with, and I used to, in my last job, do very large deals. And this is a lot of structuring, because it's large programs where you have to bring in multiple different stakeholders and parties. So you have to align goals, align objectives, align payoffs, and structure. This is as much about structuring, in fact, more about structuring than just getting money in and out. So it fundamentally appeals to what I have been doing, and I have been, I've developed some skills at, hopefully. So I said, this is a lot of structuring, because this has got many different parties which has to be brought in, and their interests, their goals, their payoffs, their objectives have to be aligned for long periods. And that's very fundamental to driving large change, because you can't drive large change and large impact on short-term, short-cycle basis and by one or two parties. So that's the other belief, and that's something which I've done at scale for over a period. So hopefully I've picked up some skills, and that can be useful here.
So on that note, I would like to say, like, our past speakers on this show have been from the strict financial background, like they are CEOs and CFOs of commercial organizations, specifically commercial organizations, and it is very delightful for us to actually have talk about something which is much more grounded and much more about the social concept, where the idea of money making isn't our sole priority, but growth and development of lives is. Okay, but however, I would like to say this finance-based organization which runs as an NPO is a little strange concept for me. So please tell us about how Social Finance India as an organization has its operations, how it operates, and what is its vision for the society.
Yeah, so in fact, I think it's very important that if you want to be a impartial, large impact driving financial intermediary in the development sector, it's important not to have a profit orientation, because the issue with profit orientation in finance, and I've obviously seen finance in all its color, is that it's very hard to then balance all other objectives very, very fairly. Okay, because it's by design it's not scheduled for that. Now the reason why it can work is because you are defining your objective as to say that we are going to create programs which otherwise would not happen in this space, and it will not happen because of either three reasons. Okay. One, because there isn't enough funding for that particular spot. Okay. Two is because normal philanthropy and normal government spending will not take the risks that are required to be taken to sort of create that funding. And three, that by adding two different or three different types of funds into the pot, you can actually multiply the speed at which you can impact people.
Okay. So that brings me to the question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I researched something about Richard Cohen, and on his speech in Stanford, he was also talking about that this model transfers the risk, and I still don't understand the risk part, like what it means about transferring the risk. So can you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, so let's say you create a program on education effectiveness, right? Where you say that we will spend some money over the next 3 years to do certain types of intervention. Let's think of some edtech interventions or models, and we expect that the learning outcome of the students will improve from X to Y.
Okay.
Right. Now you don't know today whether it can improve from X to Y at that scale for that segment of students, because enough experiments at scale has not happened. You haven't got longitudinal data for 3 years to see that, but you think it's potentially possible because the way the pedagogy is, the way the technology is, the way the model operates. So you have experts who think that it's possible. Now, in a standard grant scenario, what happens is that grants are in many cases, there are obviously exceptions, are minimization focus. It tries to minimize the cost, it tries to minimize the outlay and stuff like that. Whereas if you then bring in private capital, you can actually maximize and say, okay, we are going to cover 120,000 students or 150,000 students. You will get a return if that X to Y happens. But if X becomes less than X, then you will lose some money.
Yeah.
Now, what it also does is, because now you have created that focus of return and people are going to get paid for that, it forces you to design the program much more robustly. It then forces you to measure the program much more robustly. Yeah, so now that you bring in risk capital, which has to be paid back, you are forced to do a few things. Firstly, you are forced to define the program much more robustly.
Okay.
You are forced to create very clear measurable outcomes, and you're forced to create ways of measuring the outcome which will be objectively valid. Therefore, your entire measurement and evaluation benchmarks go up significantly, right? And third, you incentivize the provider to innovate and to experiment and to course correct during the period. And by definition, it's also a longer period. It's at least 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, which is very different from a grant model where you are going through annual budgets and you're going through line items. Okay, so you can spend so much for salaries, you can spend so much for printing, you can spend so much for traveling, and then if you have to change, you have to give a change request and a reapproval or a reappropriation request and all that sort of stuff. Here, you're telling the provider saying you have X amount of money to spend per children or per school or per whatever, and if you are seeing results not happening, adapt and change, which is a little bit like how commercial world works. Now, I'm not for a second suggesting that everything of the commercial world is valid or should be imposed on it, but some of the ways of adaptability, innovation, measurement, and robustness of design are welcome additions.
So now, without any further ado, let's go to the fairly new concept of impact investment altogether. And let's hear it straight from Mr. Shantanu that what he wants to say on this subject. So on that, sir, can you please define what is impact investments and what are the mechanisms for how these funds reach the ground reality?
Yeah, so impact investment has actually 3 different legs, right? There's the biggest one is called ESG investing, which is the environment and social governance investing, which is basically funds which focus on companies which are high on sustainability agendas. Okay, so for example, globally now Unilever is making a big case of being a very socially responsible company, and therefore there are certain funds which will focus on similar companies, and over a period of time it has been proven that typically these companies perform better than their peers because of the holistic approach towards performance. So that's one part of impact investing. There's a second part of impact investing, which is like venture capital, except that it's focused on entrepreneurs and innovations which are for the development sector, right? And they could be for profit or not for profit. But essentially, those are venture capital investments into startups or new ventures, which are very focused in serving the problem of constituents that's covered by the development sector, by the charitable sector. And then there is social finance, which is really the question of getting risk investment and other types of capital, which we call blended finance, into the development sector programs. So they are not company investments, they are not innovation investments, they are not startup investments, they are programs in the development sector. And Social Finance India does the third one, which is actually the small. So in terms of impact investing within India, I think the notion of ESG driven investing in the traditional financial sector from stock market and stuff like that is still nascent in India. And it's something which I believe will develop over the next few years. In terms of pure impact investing, which is like the venture capital investing, that has started in India, and it's accelerating pretty rapidly. And I expect that will be a continuing trend. When it comes to the third category, which is social finance, which is getting blended finance into development programs, again, there are 2 different variations in India. There are some places where it has already happened. In fact, of the total amount of blended finance programs that has happened in the world, about 15% of them in terms of value has happened in India. But again, it's very early days. It's a very, very nascent field. It's getting mainstream and it's catching the attention of people just about at this point in time. And I would expect it to grow by many multiples over the next few years.
Okay. So the next question is, what are its? Okay, so it's in the continuation of the earlier question. That comment. Are we done with this question? Measurability criterion on the impact of investments. Are we done with this?
No.
Okay.
We haven't.
Okay. So can you please comment on the measurability criterion of the impact of investment?
So according to Richard Cohen, an investment which has clear objectives to deliver both a social, including environmental and financial returns, and whose achievement is measured, just like any other financial instrument, can be called an impact investment. Kindly comment on this measurability criteria of impact investments.
So the measurability criteria of any impact investment, and again, it differs between the three groups, right? If you do pure ESG investing, it is based on the premise that ultimately the investment in companies which are more sustainable and more long-term focused with a larger stakeholder viewpoint as opposed to just shareholders will do better in the financial markets than their peers. So it's actually the measurability criteria is financial market returns being better than their peers. In case of impact investing, which is more about startups and venture capital ecosystem focused on the social issues, the measurability criteria, of course, is again going to be success of such entrepreneurs and innovation and the returns they produce, but equally in the terms of the impact they produce. And that creates a lot more complexity because, as you know, multivariate equations are tougher to solve than individual single point equations. The measurability on social finance, which is use of blended finance, is absolutely focused on the outcomes determined for those projects. There is really only one way where the project is successful or not, which is whether the outcomes defined were met or exceeded or not, and whether over a period of time, similar projects are being done with less and less of capital, and therefore better and better per beneficiary economics than in the past. So really those are the two things. One is a longitudinal trend and the other is the sharp focus on outcomes.
We have to agree that the future is a little too uncertain after the COVID-19 crisis. And we have divided opinions regarding the future plans and growth models, whether to make it much more inclusive by adding non-monetary incentives or non-monetary benefits, etc. or not. On this note, kindly talk about the future prospects of impact investment, especially with the context of the millennial generation and the generation's revised social outlook on inequality, poverty, and environment.
I think my personal view is that the millennium generation is far more attuned to the issues of inequality and to the issues of social justice than, for example, my generation or maybe the generation before that. But I think our generation was possibly the most insular in that sense, because we came into at a stage where economic growth and economic success was just getting unleashed in India, and all of us single-mindedly focused onto that. I think the current generation is far more attuned to it. I also think that the environment and the world and the politics and the economics of the world will force people to pay a lot more attention to that model, just like COVID is doing, which is bringing to stark reality and stark sight the kind of issues that happens when you have so much, so great amount of inequality. So my view with the millennials and the society at large is that I would think that focus of investments will start shifting from a binary definition of risk and return to risk, return, and impact. Will it happen overnight? The answer is no. Will it happen in significant chunks over a period of time and an accelerating trend?
We shall be closing our discussion on the technicals. And on a lighter note, let us talk about the applicability of this field on our viewers' careers. What do you think are the career prospects in the field of impact investment, and what are the skills required to pursue a career in this field for any budding finance enthusiast?
Understanding option theories and stuff like that. And of course, understanding business flows, which is beyond the financials, which is really understanding how businesses operate, understanding how value chains work, understanding how leverages work and stuff like that. But those are the hard skills. I think the most important skill in this sector is a desire to solve complicated problems with a focus on beneficiaries and stakeholders, which are otherwise left out from many such discussions. And that has to be a very firm internal belief, because without that belief, there are always going to be easier ways of making more money at a personal level. Then why would you sacrifice that to do this? And the only reason you will do this is provided you believe that helping many, many people in certain areas where they would otherwise not get addressed, whether it's in education quality, whether it's livelihood generation, whether it's sanitary and health or climate or whatever else it is, whatever appeals to that person, has to be a very central belief and a central want. Because if you don't have that, then the hard skills can be frankly used.
No interview can be complete until we internalize the pandemic that we all are going through. So you have headed finance departments of one of the leading organizations in India. And we all know that COVID-19 has put all the CFOs in a very tight space. From your years of experience, any advice that you would like to give to them?
Yes, or the CFOs that we have in the startups.
Yeah, so I spent the last 20 years of my life either being a CFO or working with CFOs. And I think I can only summarize what I've learned from them when I watched them do well during turbulent times. And this is obviously as turbulent as it gets. So there are three principles. First principle is focus on cash. Because end of the day, you need liquidity and you need solvency to first survive, and then of course turn around and then grow and thrive when fortunes turn. The second part is that there is nothing called long-term planning at this stage. Your planning cycles need to be extremely crunched. You need to be able to adapt to planning almost on a daily, weekly basis. And therefore, the only way to do that is to think of making decisions like you think of options, which is you put in a little bit of commitment, you see whether it pays off, and then you increase the commitment. You cannot get into situations, for example, if you have to do some investment, you cannot get into a situation where you have certainty of a 10-year cash flow so that you do a normal investment appraisal and then think about making that investment. But if you absolutely need to make the investment now to survive and thrive and sort of take care of the market opportunity or adjusting in market failure, you have to do it on the minimum possible model. And then if it works, then you keep increasing. So there is a very different mindset and thought process which works in that kind of agile planning and implementation model. And the third is that, look, any crisis is too good an opportunity not to fundamentally transform your businesses. So everything that was getting stuck in your management committee meetings and boardrooms in terms of fundamental transformation, this is the best time to break down age-old myths and age-old holy grails. You can actually really redefine and reimagine businesses. And in some ways, every crisis needs to be looked as
most of our viewers are students who are aspiring to enter the field of finance, either as a CA or any other finance profession. One financial advice that you would like to share with the members of CA Club India amidst this COVID-19 outbreak?
Yeah, look, I think the best piece of advice that I can provide is the fact that, for a long time, CAs thought of themselves as extremely technically trained and knowledgeable people about finance. And that continues to be true. I think CAs have a technical grounding, which is one of the best in the world. But it will be very important for all budding CAs and all young professionals to remember that the technical knowledge and the technical skill is only 5% of what it requires to be successful as a professional, especially in today's world. What is far more important is an ability to continuously learn and be extremely curious, and not just about finance, but about the world at large. To be extremely passionate about what you're doing, and frankly, to take risks with the type of work you do, with the type of businesses that you get yourself involved into. And when I say that, obviously I'm not talking about risky business from a legal standpoint, but risky business in terms of new ventures, in terms of new areas. And a challenge for CAs is a lot of the technical education is about minimizing risk or mitigating risk. And that's true for financial health. But in terms of driving businesses forward and being in the new sectors, you have to take risks. And that dual mindset is very important. So it's a tough thing for to be extremely technically competent in one area and have a slightly different mindset while actually thinking about business.
Okay. Thank you so much, Shantanu. I just want to see that have you done this? But I don't want to miss.
As the final question, I would like to ask you about the life lessons from your own experience that you would like to give to us.
Yeah, so I think there are 3-4 key learnings I've had throughout my career. The first one is that you should always think of working with the best people and the best opportunity, irrespective of whether it is the best paying or whether it is the most convenient or whether it is the easiest or the most comfortable one. Now, obviously, you have to have thresholds on all of those. But over a career, the type of people you work with and the type of opportunities you work with have an unbelievable impact on how your career shapes up and how later on you get further opportunities. So it's a bit of a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle. And I'd really encourage young people to weigh who they work for and what they work on far ahead of everything else. So that's learning number one. And I had outstanding mentors and outstanding people who I worked with. And frankly, that's been 80 or 90% of the source of my success, or whatever I've achieved in life. The second is that, it's very important to take the uncomfortable jobs, take the risks. Now, any risk is always a double-edged sword. If you fail, it cuts you very badly. But if you succeed, it propels you really fast forward. So I'm not advocating a completely wild nature in terms of the type of assignments you take over. But if it's something which is very well trodden and well done, then possibly it won't make you come out shining. In fact, the only question you should ask is, if frankly I didn't go to office, would it make a difference? Or if I didn't do this job, would it frankly make a difference if someone else did? And if the answer to that is no, then it is a commonplace job and it's not going to make you shine. So take some risk with the type of jobs and the type of choices you make in your career ladder as you sort of go up. You will fall a few times, but hopefully you will climb much faster and higher than the falls that you'll have. The third thing is that, look, I have always believed that whatever you get out of your professional life is a combination of luck, effort and attitude. Now, luck in some ways you can't control. Effort and attitude you 100% control. But then, as one famous golfer once said, the harder I try, the luckier I get. So in some ways, if you have the right effort and attitude, some of the luck is made. You won't be able to. Sometimes you'll get bad breaks. Take it on the chin and move on. And the third, and frankly, the last lesson I've heard is that it's important to stick through business cycles. If you someone who always tries to find an opportunity which is just on the upswing, which is having an easy time, in the early parts of your career, you will get such opportunities because the number of opportunities are much larger. You can always move from one place to the other. The cost of shifts are much lesser. But what it does is it doesn't create the resilience and doesn't create the knowledge base that you have to ride out business cycles. So it's important to ride through some business cycles so that your reputation is made and you also learn how to come out of tough situations. So frankly, those are the...
As an ending note, I would like to thank Mr. Shantanu Ghosh for giving his valuable time to us. And to all our viewers, I hope you enjoyed the session. Stay tuned for more.